There is a specific threshold. When you are tightening a steel bolt, you feel the resistance build in your palm, the microscopic threads biting into the cold metal. Most people stop when it gets tight, but if you have a 1998 snap-on chrome wrench, the kind with the perfectly knurled handle that I keep on the left side of my desk, you can feel the exact fragile moment before the bolt shears off completely. You learn that feeling when you spend 20 years as a mechanical engineer. You learn exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it suffers a catastrophic failure. People are a lot like steel bolts. They can handle a surprising amount of pressure right up until the second they can't. And when they break, it is never a clean snap. It is loud, it is destructive, and it usually takes down whatever is standing closest to it. I am going to tell you exactly how I found the breaking point of a man who thought he was unbreakable. But before we get into the grease and the grit of it, if you've made it this far, do us one quick favor: subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. My name is Russell. I am 62 years old. And for the last 2 decades, I have run a mid-sized freight and logistics company out of Duluth, Minnesota. If you have never been to Duluth in February, let me paint you a picture. It is the kind of cold that does not just chill your skin. It actually disrespects your bones. It is minus 14 degrees. The wind off Lake Superior feels like a physical assault. And yet, there are still 80,000-pound rigs that need to move timber, iron ore, and heavy machinery down Highway 61. It is not a business for people who like to stay clean. I started out fixing the trucks. I remember a night in 2006, the alternator on a Peterbilt 379 gave out just south of Two Harbors in the middle of a whiteout. I drove out there with a floodlight, a thermos of black coffee, and that exact chrome wrench. I lay in the slush for 3 hours getting that rig moving again. Cleverness is fast. What I do is slow. I built my company one reliable route at a time. We own our trucks. We hire our own drivers. We maintain our own fleet. We are heavy. We have assets. In a world where every 20-something with a laptop wants to be a tech-enabled freight broker without ever touching a tire, my company is a dinosaur. I am perfectly fine with that. Dinosaurs ruled the earth for 160 million years. Which brings me to Spencer. Spencer is my brother-in-law. My younger sister, Claire, married him about 12 years ago. Claire is a good woman, the kind who assumes the best in everyone, which means she is a walking target for men who only see the best in themselves. Spencer was one of those guys who seemed to have assembled his personality from a catalog. He wore insulated vests in the summer. He used the word synergy in casual conversation without a hint of irony. He had a background in software sales, but he fancied himself a disruptor. When his third startup went under, because of course it did, Claire came to me. She sat at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, tearing a paper napkin into tiny pieces, asking if I could find a place for him in my office, just until he got back on his feet. I did not want to. Something in my stomach shifted the moment she asked. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first red flag. But family is family. I brought him in as a senior account manager. Here is the thing you need to know about me. When I am nervous, or when I am trying to figure out if a structural support is failing, I don't yell. I don't get animated. When someone sits in my office and tells me a story that doesn't quite line up with gravity, I drink water. Slow. It gives the idiot time to keep digging. The first time I interviewed Spencer for the job, he sat across from my desk, crossed his legs, and spent 20 minutes explaining why my asset-heavy model was financially inefficient. He used a lot of buzzwords: supply chain agility, asset-light leveraging. I poured a glass of ice water. I took a sip. I set it down. I did not say a word. The silence sat like a fifth guest in the room. His jaw was doing that thing. That slow grinding thing people do when they realize their charm isn't working on the audience. Finally, he stopped talking. I hired him because Claire needed the health insurance. I should have handed him a check and told him to stay home. For 4 years, Spencer worked under me. He learned the routes. He learned the specific quirks of our biggest clients, the regional hardware chains, the logging operations, the agricultural equipment manufacturers. Spencer was incredibly good at taking logistics managers to expensive steakhouses in Minneapolis, dinners that I paid for, naturally. He thought buying a man a medium rare ribeye made them brothers for life. I knew that delivering a load of combine harvesters through a blizzard at 2:11 a.m. on a Tuesday is what actually keeps a contract alive. But the clients liked him. He was smooth, he was presentable, and for a while, I thought maybe he had actually settled down. I mentioned this dynamic to Vance one morning at the diner on 4th Street. Vance is 60 years old, a former corporate attorney who got tired of defending people he fundamentally hated. Now he mostly fishes for walleye on the lake and helps me manage the legal architecture of my business. Vance is not a warm person. He does not fix problems. He builds walls around them and fills the room with water. We were sitting in a back booth, the vinyl cracked and taped up with silver duct tape, drinking coffee that tasted vaguely like burnt pennies. I was telling him about a new routing software Spencer was trying to pitch to me, something that would outsource our seasonal overflow to third-party owner-operators to cut our overhead. Vance was carefully cutting his eggs. He didn't look up. He just pointed his fork at me. "He's measuring the drapes, Russ," Vance said, his voice grating like a bad starter motor. "You brought a stray cat into the house, and now it thinks it owns the sofa. He doesn't want to work for you. He wants to be you, just without the grease under his fingernails." I told Vance he was being cynical. Spencer was family. He was Claire's husband. They had just taken out a second mortgage on a house in the suburbs. Vance finally looked up, his eyes flat and entirely devoid of amusement. "Fine is a word that sounds like a compliment but isn't," he said. Totally out of context, but I knew exactly what he meant. He meant my assessment of the situation was dangerously adequate. It took another 14 months for Vance to be proven completely, devastatingly right. Spencer started taking more meetings out of the office. He started asking my lead dispatcher, a guy named Tom, who has been with me since I had one truck and a dream of two for highly specific load data, mileage metrics, fuel surcharge averages, customer retention schedules, and penalty clauses. When I casually asked Spencer about it in the break room, he gave me a very slick, very polished smile and said he was building a predictive revenue model for our fourth quarter projections. I walked back to my office. I poured myself a glass of ice water. I took a very slow sip. I watched through the glass partition as his eyes immediately tracked my movement. He was nervous, but he was hiding it under a layer of arrogance that was so thick it practically had its own zip code. He thought I was an old man who didn't understand the modern economy. He thought because I still carried a physical maintenance ledger in my glove box, I was incapable of seeing the math on a spreadsheet. That was his fundamental mistake. He assumed kindness was weakness. He assumed patience was ignorance. The shift happened in late October, just before the ice really started to choke the harbor and the freight rates spiked. I came into the office early on, a Monday morning. It was quiet. Beautiful the way certain storms are beautiful, right before they tear the roof off your house. There was a thick envelope sitting on the exact center of my desk, printed on heavy, expensive corporate cardstock that we definitely did not stock in our supply closet. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I could feel the weight of it. I sat down in my leather chair, picked up the 1998 snap-on wrench, and rolled the cold chrome between my fingers while staring at his name on the return address. I ran my thumb across the embossed logo at the top of the page. Apex Logistics. It sounded like something a 24-year-old would name a gym. The letter itself was 3 paragraphs of corporate doublespeak, thanking me for the foundational learning opportunities, and informing me that he was transitioning to a founder role in his own venture. He had cleaned out his desk over the weekend. He didn't even have the spine to look me in the eye and quit. I folded the paper in half, placed it in my top drawer, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the phone on my desk rang. It was Greg Patterson, the logistics director for a regional hardware chain that accounted for nearly 18% of my winter freight volume. Greg sounded like a man who had a bad toothache. He stammered. He talked about budget constraints and corporate mandates. Finally, he got to the point. They were terminating our contract effective at the end of the month. They had found a more agile partner who could underbid us by a significant margin. "It's Spencer, isn't it, Greg?" I asked. There was a long pause on the line. He offered us 15% under your rate, Russell. I have a board of directors. Breathing down my neck. I'm sorry. Done, I said. Yay. Done. I hung up. Over the next 48 hours, the phones in the dispatch room rang with the rhythm of a funeral march. 3 more major clients called to pull their accounts. The agricultural equipment manufacturer, the logging operation out of Grand Rapids, every single one of them had been buttered up by Spencer at those expensive Minneapolis steakhouses. By Thursday afternoon, roughly 40% of our guaranteed fourth quarter revenue had evaporated. It was $1.8 million in contracts, gone. My lead dispatcher, Tom, came into my office holding a stack of printed cancellation notices. His face was gray. He dropped the papers on my desk. His hand was still frozen on the table for a second before he pulled it back. He gutted us, Russ. He took the whole northern corridor. How the hell is he even going to move that much freight? He doesn't own a single rig. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a coffee mug at the wall. I went very, very quiet. I pulled the 1898 snap-on wrench toward me and tapped it once against the glass top of my desk. The sound was sharp. He's brokering it, Tom. He's doing exactly what he pitched to me. He's taking the contracts, taking a sliver off the top, and subcontracting the actual hauling to an independent fleet. Who? Tom asked, his voice tight. I don't know yet, but I will. That evening, Claire called me. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. She sounded ecstatic. She told me how proud she was of Spencer, how he had finally taken the leap to start his own firm. And he told me you two worked out an amazing partnership. She said, her voice bright and entirely innocent. A sister company. He said you were so supportive of him taking on the overflow clients. I closed my eyes. The silence had weight to it. I could have blown it up right then. I could have told her that her husband was a thief, a liar, and a coward who had just blown a massive hole in the side of her brother's livelihood. But you don't tear down a load-bearing wall without bracing the ceiling first. Yeah, Claire, I said, my voice perfectly even. It's definitely a new chapter. We should all do dinner to celebrate. She said. Let's get through the winter rush first, I replied. Tell him I said good luck. I hung up the phone and sat in my car for a while. I mean that literally. I sat in the driveway with the engine off for 45 minutes, watching my own breath fog the windshield. I wasn't plotting a movie villain revenge. I was doing math. The next morning, I was back in the cracked vinyl booth at the diner on 4th Street with Vance. He already had his laptop open, a rare sight that meant he was actually interested. The waitress walked over, took one look at our faces, dropped a fresh pot of coffee on the table, and backed away slowly. I pulled the filings, Vance said, turning the screen toward me. Apex Logistics LLC. Registered 3 months ago. He was setting this up while he was on your payroll, using your Wi-Fi, drinking your coffee. I will not be taking questions about that, I muttered. Show me the operational structure. Vance tapped the screen. It's exactly what you thought. It's a hollow shell, a ghost ship. He's got a fancy website, a leased office in downtown Duluth with exposed brick and absolutely zero assets. He's functioning as an independent broker. He undercut me by 15%, I said, tracing the edge of my coffee mug. My margins are tight, Vance, but they're real. I pay for diesel, maintenance insurance, and my driver's pensions. He doesn't. He's pocketing the difference. But to move that kind of volume, especially the heavy logging equipment, he needs a dedicated fleet. You can't just rent a few box trucks for that. You need specialized flatbeds. You need drivers who know how to chain down 40 tons of steel on ice. Vance scrolled down. He signed an exclusive master lease agreement, found it in the UCC filings. He's leasing his entire operational capacity from one source. He stopped, and I watched his eyes narrow. Well, I'll be damned. Who? Barrow Fleet Services. Something in my chest did a thing it had never done before. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was close. David Barrow had been running a leasing company across the bridge in Superior, Wisconsin, for almost 30 years. He had a yard full of heavy haulers, but the old man was a notoriously terrible businessman. He was drowning in debt. I knew this because David had called me twice in the last year practically begging me to buy some of his used rigs to inject some cash into his failing operation. Spencer is leasing his entire capacity from Barrow, I said slowly, the picture snapping into crystal clear focus. Barrow gets a massive guaranteed contract to save his business, and Spencer gets his asset-light fleet. There's more, Vance said, leaning in. His voice dropped. To win those contracts away from you, Spencer had to make them feel safe. They know he's a startup. They know it's a risk. So he offered them ironclad service-level agreements. SLAs. I knew what that meant. In logistics, an SLA is a promise written in blood. How strict, brutal, Vance said, tapping a pen against the table. He guaranteed 99% on-time delivery for the winter quarter. If he misses a delivery window by more than 12 hours, the financial penalties are catastrophic. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars per day, per client, in liquidated damages. He essentially collateralized his own company to win their trust. He can only make those guarantees, I said, if he assumes Barrow's trucks will always be there, ready to turn the key. Exactly. Vance took a sip of his black coffee. He built a very beautiful, very modern glass house, Russ, but it's resting on David Barrow's crumbling foundation. I looked out the diner window at the gray sky over Lake Superior. The ice was starting to form along the shoreline. Winter was coming, and with it the heaviest shipping weeks of the year. Spencer thought he had outsmarted the dinosaur. He thought, because he understood software and synergy, he understood the physical reality of moving freight. He didn't. He had built a system entirely dependent on a third-party vendor he didn't control, assuming the market would remain static. He hadn't accounted for the possibility that the board could simply be flipped over. Vance, I said quietly, not taking my eyes off the freezing lake. How much do you think David Barrow would take for a total buyout of his company? Vance stopped chewing. He stared at me for a long time. Then, very slowly, a grim, jagged smile spread across his face. I'll make a call. The buyout was not a clean affair. But then again, nothing that involves moving millions of dollars in heavy machinery ever is. David Barrow was a desperate man, sitting on a pile of rusting equipment, and he was more than happy to hand over the keys to his kingdom once the check cleared. By the following Tuesday, a shell corporation I had established years ago, entirely detached from my main freight firm, owned 100% of Barrow Fleet Services. I didn't change the name. I didn't change the letterhead. I didn't even fire the dispatcher. I just went to the yard in Superior, parked my truck in the back corner, and walked into the garage. The smell hit me instantly. That specific blend of diesel fumes, cold iron, and old transmission fluid. It was the smell of honesty. I found a foreman in the back, a guy named Miller who had been working for Barrow since the late 90s. He was covered in grime, a wrench in his hand that looked like it had been through a war. I watched him work for a few minutes before he noticed me. He looked up, squinted, and wiped his hands on a rag. "You looking for someone?" he asked. "I'm the new owner," I said. My voice was calm, steady, just the facts. But for the next 3 weeks, that doesn't change a single thing for you. You operate exactly as you have been. You answer to your old manager. I'm just here to audit the fleet. Miller looked me up and down. He wasn't a man who cared about corporate titles. As long as the payroll check clears, I don't care if the owner is the Pope or the devil himself. The check will clear, I said. But Miller, I need you to pull every single maintenance log for the Apex Logistics account. I want to see the service history for every truck that's running their routes. I want them on my desk by tonight. That's a lot of paper, he grunted. It's a lot of liability, I countered. I spent the next 48 hours sitting in that small, windowless office at the back of the yard, drinking lukewarm coffee and reading through thousands of pages of inspection reports. What I found was exactly what I had feared, and exactly what I needed. Spencer had been pushing those trucks hard. He was running them into the ground to hit his delivery windows. The maintenance was being deferred. The brake linings were thin. The cooling systems were compromised, and the electrical harnesses were held together by nothing more than prayers and electrical tape. Spencer didn't know because he never went to the yard. He never walked the lot. He lived in his spreadsheets and his downtown office, watching little blue dots move across a GPS map. He thought the trucks were immutable, reliable objects. He didn't see the reality of an aging fleet running on frozen asphalt. Then, the weather turned. The first major Arctic front of the season slammed into Duluth on a Thursday. The temperature plummeted to -25. The wind chill was dangerous. It was the kind of weather that froze the air in your lungs and turned roads into mirrors. Every logistics company in the upper Midwest braced for the crunch. This was the week Spencer had to prove his Agile model worked. If he hit his delivery targets during this blizzard, he would solidify his contracts for the next year. If he failed, his SLAs would activate. I was sitting in my office at my own company, watching the storm whip against the window, when Vance walked in. He looked like he had been living on coffee and spite. "The reports are in," Vance said, dropping a folder on my desk. "Apex Logistics has 42 loads currently on the road. All of them are on barrow trucks. All of them are currently delayed because of the storm." "How delayed?" "They're sitting on the side of I-35. The fuel lines are gelling up because they haven't been treated with the right additive, and the hydraulic seals on the flatbeds are popping in the cold." He paused, his voice turning ice cold. "They're at the 12-hour mark, Russ. If they don't move in the next 60 minutes, the penalty clauses in his contracts kick in. Every single one of them." I stood up and walked to the window. I could see the city lights blurring. In the snow, I had the power to call Miller at the yard. I could tell him to send out the service crews. I could get those trucks running. I could save my brother-in-law's company, protect my sister's financial future, and let him walk away with a bruised ego. I could be the bigger man, but then I thought about the steakhouse dinners. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he told me my business was inefficient. I thought about the fact that he hadn't just taken the business, he had actively worked to dismantle mine. He had lied to my face while he was stealing from my pantry. "Russ," Vance asked, his voice low, "do we authorize the repair crews?" I turned back to my desk. I picked up that 1998 snap-on wrench. It was cold, heavy, and solid. It had never failed me, and I had never failed it. "No," I said, "we don't." I sat down and poured a glass of ice water. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I watched the clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. 12 hours had passed. The penalties were now officially in effect. The contract damage claims would be millions. His glass house wasn't just cracking. It was shattering. "What happens now?" Vance asked. "Now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we wait for the phone to ring. The fallout of a bad business decision doesn't usually happen all at once. It's a slow leak. But when you tie your entire financial existence to a liquidated damages clause during a Minnesota blizzard, the end comes with the subtlety of a freight train driving through your living room." By 2:14 p.m., on Friday, the storm had upgraded from a severe warning to a generational event. Highway 61 was a parking lot of whiteout conditions. Interstate 35, just north of Hinckley, was completely impassable, and Spencer's phone calls started bleeding over into my world. It started with Greg Patterson from the hardware chain. He called my direct line, bypassing my dispatcher entirely. He didn't sound like a corporate director anymore. He sounded like a man who was about to lose his pension. He told me Apex Logistics was totally unresponsive. Their tracking portals were offline, and he had $300,000 of inventory freezing in the back of dead trucks. He begged me to send my rigs to recover the trailers. I told him very politely that my fleet was currently securing our own dedicated contracts and that emergency recovery rates were roughly 3 times the standard tariff. He didn't even hesitate. He told me to dispatch the trucks and bill him whatever I wanted. He just needed the freight moved. I hung up the phone. I looked at Tom, who was standing in my doorway. I gave him a single nod. He turned around and started marshaling our heavy wreckers. We weren't just going to haul the freight. We were going to impound Spencer's stranded trailers until the emergency invoices were paid. 40 minutes later, the front door of my office building blew open. I didn't have to look up from my desk to know who it was. I could hear his boots heavily hitting the floor tiles. Spencer walked past the receptionist without a word and shoved my glass door open. He looked terrible. The insulated vest he loved so much was soaked through with snow. His face was flushed. His hair was plastered to his forehead. And that incredibly slick, polished arrogance he usually wore had completely evaporated. He looked exactly like a man who had just realized gravity applies to him too. He stood in front of my desk, dripping melting snow onto my carpet. He was breathing hard. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. "Russ," he started, his voice cracking slightly, before he cleared his throat and tried to force that old confident tone back into his chest. "We have a situation. An industry-wide situation." "Do we?" I asked. I picked up my glass of ice water. I took a slow sip. "The weather," he said, waving his hand toward the window, as if I hadn't noticed the apocalypse happening outside. "It's an act of God. The entire supply chain is frozen. My fleet provider, Barrow, they're totally dropping the ball. Their trucks are failing on the highway. Their maintenance is a joke. I can't even get their dispatch on the phone." I sat back in my leather chair. "That sounds like a difficult operational challenge, Spencer. I thought your asset-light model was built for agility." He ignored the jab. "Desperation makes people incredibly deaf. I need your trucks, Russ. I know we had our differences, but this is family. Claire is terrified. If I miss these delivery windows, the SLAs are going to trigger. It'll bankrupt Apex by Monday morning. I need you to subcontract your heavy haulers to me, just for the weekend. I'll give you 20% of the gross." He was trying to negotiate. He was literally drowning, and he was trying to sell me the water. 20%, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "Fine, 30. We can draw up a sister company agreement right now. Just get your dispatch to call my guys. We can salvage this." He placed both hands on my desk, leaning in. "You have the assets. I have the contracts. We can save the accounts." This was the moment. This was the exact threshold on the steel bolt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I reached out and pulled the 1998 snap-on wrench closer to my keyboard. I aligned it perfectly parallel with the edge of the desk. "Here's the thing, Spencer," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the hum of the heater. "You don't have the contracts anymore." He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I do. Greg Patterson called me an hour ago," I said, watching his eyes. "So did the logging operation. So did the agriculture manufacturer. When your tracking went dark and your trucks stopped moving, they invoked the emergency failure clauses in their contracts. They terminated Apex Logistics for breach of SLA." The color drained from his face. "They can't do that. It's an act of God. The lease agreement." "Your lease agreement with your clients might have an act of God clause," I interrupted smoothly, "but your master lease agreement with your fleet provider explicitly states that Barrow Fleet Services is not liable for weather-related delays. You assumed all liability when you signed for those trucks. You guaranteed the clients a 99% uptime. You built a house of cards on someone else's foundation. Spencer." "I'll sue David Barrow," he snapped, his voice pitching up into a panic. "I will drag his company into court and gut it for gross negligence. His maintenance logs are a complete fiction." I opened my top drawer. I reached inside and pulled out a manila folder. I tossed it onto the glass surface of my desk. It slid to a stop right in front of his hands. "You should look at those," I said. He hesitated, staring at the folder like it was a live wire. Slowly, he opened it. The first page was the master ownership transfer document for Barrow Fleet Services. He stared at it. He read the name of the holding company. He read the signature at the bottom. My signature. I watched his brain try to process the information. I watched the realization move from his eyes, down to his jaw, and finally into his shoulders as they completely collapsed. "You," he whispered, looking up at me. The bravado was entirely gone. "You bought them." 3 weeks ago, I confirmed. "I own the trucks you leased. I own the debt you took out to lease them. I own the maintenance facility that you never bothered to visit. And when this storm hit, I ordered my mechanics to ground any vehicle that didn't meet the strict winter safety protocols, which, unfortunately for you, was every single truck you were renting. You set me up," he breathed, stepping back from the desk. "You deliberately sabotaged my company." "I did absolutely nothing," I corrected him, leaning forward. "I didn't force you to undercut my rates. I didn't force you to lie to the clients. I didn't force you to sign a suicidal SLA to win business you couldn't handle. All I did was enforce the exact safety standards and lease terms that you agreed to. I just let you operate in the reality you created. Silence settled over the room. It wasn't the tense, combative silence from before. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a definitive ending. He looked around my office, at the physical ledgers, at the heavy steel models of trucks on my shelves, realizing for the first time that my slowness was not weakness, it was patience. And trust me, Spencer, I added, delivering the final blow. You don't need to worry about the freight freezing on the highway. I already dispatched my own fleet to recover the trailers. He looked confused for a fraction of a second. You recovered my loads? No, I said softly. I recovered my loads. When the clients terminated you, they hired me back on emergency retention. I am currently hauling that freight under my own company name, billing them triple the standard rate for the emergency rescue. And because of the SLA penalties you signed, the clients are legally passing my emergency invoices directly onto Apex Logistics. You are paying me 3 times my normal rate to do the job you stole from me. I will never forget the look on his face. It was the look of a man who had jumped out of an airplane, confident he could build a parachute on the way down, only to realize I owned the ground he was about to hit. I'm bankrupt, he said. It wasn't a question. By Monday morning, yes. You owe the clients. You owe Barrow Fleet Services for the lease termination. You have absolutely nothing. He stood there for a long time. The snow continued to melt off his boots, soaking into the carpet. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. Panic is a loud sound, but collapse is practically silent. He simply turned around and walked out of my office, leaving the door open behind him. The cold air from the hallway drifted in. I sat alone in the quiet. I picked up the snap-on wrench. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I just felt tired. The rot had been cleared out, the structure was secure, but the house still smelled like smoke. By Monday morning, the storm finally broke. The sky over Duluth was a blinding, painfully bright blue, and the temperature settled at a brittle -12 degrees. The physical reality of the weekend was staggering, but my crews handled it the way they always do. Slowly, methodically, and without complaining. It cost exactly $142,500 in emergency fuel, hazard pay, and heavy-duty wrecker fees to recover the 42 stranded trailers from the ice. Every single penny of that, plus my triplicated emergency rates, was legally invoiced to Apex Logistics. By Tuesday afternoon, Spencer's company didn't just have a zero balance. It was buried under roughly $1.2 million in service-level agreement penalties and operational debt. The glass house hadn't just shattered. It had been ground into sand. I met Vance at the diner on 4th Street on Wednesday morning. The snowplows were still scraping the avenues outside, the heavy steel blades making that deep, grinding sound against the asphalt. Vance looked entirely too well-rested for a man who had spent his weekend drafting corporate execution documents. He had a stack of manila folders sitting next to his plate of eggs, perfectly squared off. "The creditors are circling," Vance said, not looking up as he buttered his toast. "The hardware chain is filing a lien. The agriculture guys are preparing a lawsuit for the damaged inventory that sat on the highway. Apex Logistics is officially a toxic asset. It's done, Russ. We won." I looked at my coffee. It was black, hot, and tasted exactly like victory is supposed to taste. Bitter and slightly exhausting. "What about their house, Vance?" Vance stopped chewing. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What about it?" "Spencer took out a second mortgage to fund his startup," I said, tracing the rim of the ceramic mug with my thumb. "He collateralized his personal assets to secure the early lines of credit before he won the big contracts. If the corporate veil gets pierced, and with his gross negligence it easily could, the creditors aren't just going to take his fancy leased office. They're going to take Claire's house. They're going to take her pension." Vance sighed, a long, rough sound that sounded like a tire losing air. He pushed his plate away. "You are an incredibly frustrating man to work for. You know that? I build you a perfect guillotine, and you want to put a padded mat underneath the basket. I didn't do this to destroy my sister, Vance. I did this to protect my business. Fine, Vance muttered, pulling one of the folders toward him. If you want to play savior, it's going to cost you. But we can build a firewall. You buy the debt. That evening, I invited Spencer and Claire to my house. I didn't want to do it at the office. The office is for business. And what was about to happen was purely family, in all its messy, painful reality. I built a fire in the living room. I made a pot of decaf coffee. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath, mentally braced the ceiling, and opened the door. Claire looked like she had aged 5 years and 4 days. Her eyes were red, and she was clutching her purse with both hands, her knuckles completely white. Spencer was standing half a step behind her. He didn't look like a disruptor anymore. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had been caught standing out in the rain without a coat, shivering and utterly defeated. I let them in. Nobody said anything for a while. The silence sat heavy in the room, accompanied only by the crackle of the birch logs in the fireplace. We sat down. I didn't offer any small talk. We sat down. I didn't offer any small talk. Small talk is an insult when someone's life is falling apart. I know everything, Claire said softly, looking down at her coffee mug. Spencer told me. He told me about the weather, the fleet failing, the contracts. He told me, we're going to lose the house. She looked up at me, and the fear in her eyes was genuine. Russ, I'm so sorry. I know he competed against you. I know he took your clients, but he was just trying to build something for us. And now, the lawyers are saying we owe over $1 million. I looked at Spencer. He was staring at the floor. He hadn't told her the whole truth. He hadn't told her about the lies, the manipulation, or the fact that I was the one holding the hammer. He had spun it as a tragic tale of bad luck and corporate cruelty. I could have corrected the record right then. I could have laid out the timeline, the UCC filings, the buyout of Barrow, Fleet Services. I could have absolutely humiliated him in front of his wife. But there is a specific threshold when you are tightening a steel bolt. You feel the resistance build in your palm. If I told Claire exactly what kind of man she married, it wouldn't just break Spencer. It would break her. Sometimes, fixing something means you have to absorb the rust yourself. You aren't going to lose the house, Claire, I said quietly. Spencer's head snapped up. He looked at me, his eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and sheer panic, waiting for the trap to spring. I reached onto the coffee table and slid a single manila folder across the wood. It stopped, right in front of him. I had my lawyers draft this up this afternoon, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. My holding company is purchasing Apex Logistics in its entirety. I am absorbing your corporate debt. I am paying off the SLA penalties to the clients. I am settling the lease termination with the fleet provider. Claire let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. Russ, you can't afford that. That's $1 million. It's an investment. I lied smoothly. I'm acquiring the brand and the data architecture. I wasn't. The brand was toxic garbage, and the data was useless to me. But she needed a reason that made sense. I turned my eyes entirely to Spencer. His jaw was doing that slow grinding thing again. But this time, it was out of absolute terror. He knew I wasn't doing this for free. He knew exactly what this was. The purchase price for Apex Logistics is exactly $1, I said to him. And the assumption of the debt comes with a single, non-negotiable clause. You will sign a non-compete agreement tonight. It stipulates that you are permanently legally barred from operating, consulting, or working in the freight and logistics industry in any capacity anywhere in the United States for the rest of your natural life. The fire popped loudly. Spencer stared at the paper. If you ever so much as look at a commercial bill of lading, I continued, dropping my voice to a near whisper. The holding company will instantly call in the original debt, the firewall will drop, and the creditors will take your home, your cars, and your retirement accounts. Do we understand each other? He knew I meant it. He knew I had the lawyers, the patience, and the capital to enforce it until the day I died. He slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a pen, and signed the document. His hand was shaking so badly his signature looked like a polygraph test of a liar. Done? I asked. Done, he whispered. Claire hugged me before they left. She cried onto my shoulder. thanking me for saving them, calling me the best brother in the world. I hugged her back, looking over her shoulder at Spencer, who was standing by the front door. Our eyes met. He looked away first. It has been 3 years since that night. I still own my company. We still own our trucks, we still hire our own drivers, and we still maintain our own fleet. The clients came back, their tails slightly tucked, and I welcomed them with open arms and a slightly higher premium for my reliability. David Barrow retired to Florida, and I integrated his old fleet into my own, retrofitting them with proper parts and actually doing the maintenance. Spencer works in commercial real estate now. He sells office space in the suburbs. We see them every Thanksgiving and Christmas. The dynamic is different now. It is polite, it is careful. He doesn't bring up synergy anymore. He doesn't offer me business advice. When we sit around the dinner table, he is incredibly deferential to me. We are civil. That's enough. Some days I wonder if I did the right thing, keeping the truth from Claire. Most days I know I did. You can rebuild a shattered engine block if you have enough heat and the right weld, but you can't put a family's trust back together once the threads are completely stripped. You just have to bolt it down tight and hope the vibrations don't shake it apart. I don't regret what I did. I regret that I had to do it. But the world is full of people who think they can outsmart the physical weight of reality. They think they can build empires out of air and promises. Late last night, after all the drivers had gone home, I went down to the main shop. The heavy bay doors were closed against the Duluth winter, the heaters humming steadily in the rafters. The air smelled beautifully of diesel and cold iron. I walked over to my workbench, reached out and picked up that 1998 Snap-on chrome wrench. I didn't have anything to fix. I just rolled the cold metal between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, feeling the solid, undeniable truth of it. I put it back on the left side of the desk, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind me.